What's up, everybody? Peter X. This old coffer here. Welcome to, well, this is not a typical episode. I'm recording this on Tuesday, June 10th, 2025. And yesterday we lost a musical legend. Sylvester Stewart, better known as Sly Stone, passed away at the age of 82. And so have to do a tribute episode to the one and only Sly Stone. I mean, in the last 60 years, his impact on popular music is just monumental. And, I'll touch on some of that. A few things I've learned, Sly played a lot more instruments than I realized. So he played the guitar, the bass, the keyboard, the drums, and the harmonica. So he was Prince before Prince, and I know Paul McCartney plays the big four too. The harmonica is significant. I mean, it's a cheap little instrument, but it's one of the hardest to play. I mean, I've been on YouTube out of curiosity watching just the basics of playing different instruments. And to me, the harmonica and the trumpet are, the two of the hardest instruments to play. Guitar is probably on that list. Not sure about the drummer. I know it's hard to find a good drummer. The question is personally, I mean, do you need natural rhythm to be a drummer? I don't know the answer to that question. I know I don't have natural rhythm, so I'd have to work to be a good drummer. So I don't know with the historical problem of finding good drummers, is that because folks want to show off and do, play Funky Drummer by Clyde Stubblefield of James Brown, or Moby Dick by John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, or, so are they showing off and not, doing their basic job of keeping time, or is it just keeping time that hard for most people? I don't know the answer to that, but harmonica playing is not easy, even though it's a cheap little instrument. The first innovators really in popular music, in this current era, and I call, the 50s folks, I call the founders, and then, really the mid 60s is what I call this current era of music. So the Beatles and Sly Stone are the first innovators in my opinion. But the Beatles were pop and rock and did a lot of interesting stuff and innovated out of that. And they essentially, used, a lot of cool stuff and did synthesizer stuff before synthesizers became available. And is even going back before the era of the founders. Ray Charles was an innovator, and Sly is more close to Ray Charles than he is to the Beatles. So Sly took jazz, gospel, the blues, and country. So he took different genres and melded them. Sly took soul, rock, doo-wop. I mean, listen to the vocal harmony Sly did with Sly and the Family Stone. The Beach Boys did it, but at the same time as Sly was doing it. But, there's those doo-wop melodies, George Clinton started off, with P-Funk doing, the doo-wop melodies, and then he kind of borrowed from Sly later in the 70s. And then Sly brought in, the Bay Area, the psychedelic stuff from the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and stuff like that. And then, we've already covered the fact that Sly, created funk along with James Brown, but Sly was a little more experimental than James Brown. The other thing, and Sly was also very instrumental with disco because, with the album There's a Riot Going On, he brings in, one of the early drum machines. So, covered this before, but we're doing the Sly tribute, so I have to, focus on why Sly was so important. So, as I said, Sly, I figured this out and I dropped it in one of the the three things of the month. But for a while, it took me a minute to figure out, what the one was for Sly. And usually it's that enhanced snare or, hitting the bass drum and the bass guitar at the same time on the one that Bootsy and James Brown created. But really, I mean, when you talk about the one overall, it's the central theme, what does the music revolve around? And Sly's use of the one was he had a great bass player named Larry Graham. And so that was his one. And his music revolved around the bass. And so, oftentimes the rhythm guitar was mirroring the bass, and the horns also mirrored the bass. And so that was Sly's way of doing the one, because his drummer was never, on the drum. The one, I mean, the drummer is, a typical rock drummer, but, he's funky because, the funk was, was rooted in Larry Graham's bass playing. And I think, again, Sly's influence on disco is very underrated. So, I mean, Sly's influence. I mean, there's no Prince without Sly. And you know how big of a Prince fan I have, and a whole channel, devoted to Prince. And I don't think Prince, I mean, even Prince, if you go back and you look at the Paisley and look at Sly's look, he borrowed from Sly's look. The Revolution was patterned to band, multiracial patterned after the family Stone. The whole melding of different genres, before the, Purple Rain, the melding of R&B and rock, there was Stand, did the same thing, back in the late 60s. And so, Prince is very, very informed by Sly and the Family Stone, and really his, when he came out, it was, 1999, and the passing of the baton and the vocals on that song, that comes from Sly. Sly had was very political, or could be very political in his songs. His early stuff, Stand and Dance to the Music of Life, those three classic albums are very positive and uplifting. Some politics, as I say, don't call me nigger whitey, but it's also don't call me whitey niggers. It was, directed at both racial groups. But then, Sly's most interesting album is There's a Riot Going On. And I read, I forget why I read this years ago, but it's, an argument was made that that's the most, There's a Riot Going On was the most important album of the 1970s. If I believe the album was even released in 1970 or 71. And Sly moves away from the uplifting stuff, and it's a very kind of pessimistic, dreary, depressing album. And it's you had Woodstock, and then you have the Rolling Stones, playing Ultimate, which was the Altamont racetrack where, a concert goer was murdered by the security who happened to be the Hells Angels. And everybody thought, that's when the love and peace and, the hippie and the summer of love ended at Altamont. And There's a Riot Going On sort of mirrors the pessimism of all the promise of the 60s and going into the 70s. I'm like, I don't know how realistic this is, but There's a Riot Going On is a really fascinating album. It did pretty well. It's considered a masterpiece. It's a very honest album. Sly did most of the album himself, and he was stoned through most of the, he's drugged up through most of the album, and it shows. I remember it was in that first, a couple of weeks ago, saw my aunt who gave me my first 20 or 30 albums, and Stan was in that, and And so was There's a Riot Going On. And I just remember, as a 12 or 13-year-old listening to these two albums and be like, what the hell happened, But, some people, and I haven't seen any evidence of this, but some people, now like to juxtapose There's a Riot Going On with What's Going On. And can't remember what came first, but some people say, There's a Riot Going On is an answer to what's going on. And there's no song called There's a Riot Going On an album, on the album, which is interesting. But Sly does something very interesting, on the greatest hits, his first greatest hits, which was a single album. Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again is on it. And then Sly redoes it, he slows it down. The original Thank You is funky, and it's really the first time, we see the full slap bass and the pick bass that, Larry Graham became famous for. But Sly and There's a Riot Going On, it slows it down, it's dreary and drudgery and just kind of goes along, and so that was very interesting. So yeah, when I was taking notes, I was all over the place. But the other thing, that Sly brings that James doesn't bring. James, I think I've said this numerous times. James, he takes all the instruments and turns them into drums. So even his hey, yeah, I mean, he takes his vocals and turns them into drums. He takes the horns and turns them into drums. He takes the guitar with the chicken scratch guitar and turns them into drums. And the thing that Sly brought, going back to the one in Larry Graham's bass, and a couple of the songs Dance to the Melody off his second album and Dance to Music off the second album, Dance to Music, Larry Graham puts his bass through a fuzz box, and that was the first attempt to get that fat bass. And then, the fat bass doesn't come in until, Flashlight in 78, and, I just did an episode on Funk and the Fat Bass, and the Roland SH-101 and the Mini Moog synthesizers. And so we're talking Lakeside and the Gap Band and Zap. Sly planted the seeds for that, with the, Larry Graham putting his bass through the fuzz bass, or the fuzz box. So I know I'm jumping around a little, but, I've just been thinking about this and was obviously affected, since I have a whole channel on the funk when Sly passed. But, going back to this idea of, There's a Riot Going On being the most one of the most important albums of the 1970s. So it drops in the early 70s, I want to say 70, 71. It's a very laid back album. And, the 70s has that soft rock and that very laid back rock. So things James Taylor, some of the stuff by the Eagles, Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Water, America, Seals and Croft, these kind of pop rock folks. And that smooth R&B and even the smooth funk, like Confunction that comes in the later 70s, and even I consider Earth, Wind and Fire and smoother funk. Isley Brothers is smoother funk. I mean, all of that smoothness, that soft intensity that you think of when you think of certain acts in the 70s is present, and There's a Riot Going On. So I really think that, the DNA from There's a Riot Going On it goes in many different directions and different genres throughout the 70s. That's different from the 60s, and it's different from the 80s. And really the first album that kind of lays that DNA out, even though Sly Stone through, the entire album is There's a Riot Going On. So yeah, I'm jumping around and going all over the place a little bit here, but that's who Sly was, and it's only a day removed from losing him. So hey, it is. I mean, I guess I really am paying tribute to Sly, in the structure of this too. Um, Sly became pretty unreliable. From riot. There's a riot going on. He's oftentimes showed up late to concerts and sometimes didn't show up at all. I mean, the drug problems got really, really bad. I know it's nice to see that, Questlove did a whole documentary on him that was released just in the last, I don't know, 6 to 8 months on Netflix. So it's nice that Sly was around to see that. I know Sly did his own book about 2 years ago. So I'm glad Sly got to say his own piece on himself, but also, he got to see Questlove's piece on him. And I definitely want to watch the Questlove. I've heard good things about it, and I will obviously take a look at that. The other thing that was interesting about Sly is he became very weary of fame and, struggled with fame and, was a recluse, from the, there's a riot going on until his death. I mean, he'd show up and, the Grammys thing, they did a tribute for him in, 2007, 8, 9, and he showed up sat in half a song and walked off the stage. There's a couple of videos on YouTube where his kids played as well, so he showed up for 2 or 3 songs and just got up and left. And the kids are just like, well, that's just dad being dad. But so Sly was, has always been enigmatic and done his own thing. But he really did struggle with fame as he moved on, throughout the 70s and on. So yeah, let me give you my top 10 Sly Stone songs, and they're all the big ones on that, and to give you a couple of deep cuts as well. But obviously, thank you for letting me be myself again. Everybody's a star. Love that, because that was the positivity early in his career that Sly brought. Stand and the political activism of the 60s, danced to the music and talked about Larry Graham's bass going to the fuzz box on that. If You Want Me to Stay, that's post There's a Riot Going On, his last big hit. And there's a lot of skepticism in that song, but it's also like, maybe Sly even dealing, talking about fame. If you want me to stay, I don't want to stay, essentially. I don't, forget this fame thing. Family affair, there's a riot going on, and, Sly was pretty stoned when, but he also has his sister Rose, and I think Freddie, sings on that, but that might be the only vocals other than himself on That's a Riot. Want to Take You Higher, again, political but spiritual, and Sly at his best, his positive best. Everyday People, I mean, that's still, come on, I Want to Be a Star, we're all, everybody has value. Sing a Simple Song, one of my favorite Sly songs of all times, it's kind of a little bit out of control, but not. I mean, you'll never hear a song like that again today. I mean, because everybody uses drum machines. But yeah, it's controlled, but parts of it's not controlled. And we'll never get that again unless you go to a concert. But most concerts now use some sort of drum machine as well. And then finally, my last favorite Sly Stone is Fun. Deep cuts. I talked about Dance to the Medley earlier. About 3 or 4 songs, strung together in that one, and parts of Dance to the Music broken up, and throughout those 3 or 4 parts. Don't Burn, Baby Burn, I think that's the second or third album. You Can Make It If You Try, again, that's on the Stand album, his positive thing. And Trip to Your Heart was his very first album that didn't have any real hits on it, but that's the best one off of the first album I liked. So yeah, I had to do my Sly tribute. A legend. I think he's. If you had the top 10, I don't know who. The Beatles would be in there. most influential, who changed the trajectory of music. He's certainly in that 10. I don't know beyond the Beatles and Sly who you put in there, but those two definitely, get put in. And so, as I said on my Facebook post, thank you, Sly, for the funk. But the tributes from all of the, musical artists from across the spectrum were all on social media yesterday. I mean, musicians know how important Sly Stone was. So anyway, on that note, thanks for coming through. So let me hit the close. I got 6 albums of my own. I recorded them named Exodus, Exodus. I have, all my albums are attached here on the YouTube channel. But I also have, first album is Book 1, and I also have the 317 Volume 1 and Volume 2. And I also write science fiction fantasy. I have 2 novels and novella on Amazon, and I write under the name Peter Exodus O'Coffer. So thank you again. Rest in peace, Sly Stone, and thank you again.